So there are two microphones. If people want to line up and ask Marty a question, we'll rotate between them. If you can please introduce yourself to us, tell us where you're from, and just try to keep your questions as short and succinct as possible so that we can get through as many of you as possible. Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Peyton. I'm a journalist here in Ottawa. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about those moonshots. What do you think are the things that the media can do so that more of our journalists can keep their jobs?
Well, I'm not thinking in terms of moonshots. I'm thinking in terms of wheels on luggage. So, I think fundamentally, just to look at it broadly, is I think we have to recognize that the digital world is it's a distinct medium, that the web is a distinct medium, and mobile is probably its own distinct medium. So, when newspapers, the types of communication have changed, have evolved over the years, people used to put pictures on walls, right? So when newspapers came along, over time, that style of writing changed, but ultimately we developed sort of a structured style for newspaper writing, a certain kind of writing. Different stories called for different things, but there was a limited range, and there was considered newspaper writing. Radio came along, and lo and behold, it doesn't really work to just read the newspaper story on radio. It's not very interesting. It's not very dynamic. So radio scripts evolved. Then television came along, and you don't read a radio script on television. It has its own form of communication. So here we are, we're in the web world, and what do? First, we put newspaper stories up on the web. Well, it didn't work for radio, and it didn't work for television, but somehow we expected it to work really well for the web. And it doesn't work. Sometimes it'll work, but it doesn't work naturally. And so there are new storytelling forms that are emerging for the web that work extremely well. And it's more conversational, it's more accessible, it deploys all of the tools that we have available to us, video, audio, social tweets, original documents, annotations of documents, things like that, all these tools that we have. And you can't take that story and put it in a newspaper. And you can't read it on the air, and you can't put it on radio. It is distinct. And probably mobile, primarily smartphones, will develop their own form of communication as well. And keep in mind, something like half the people who are coming to us digitally are on a mobile device, typically a smartphone. And I would bet a good portion of them are walking down the street, not looking where they're going. And you need to think of that differently. And so I think that, fundamentally we have to think through, well, what are the forms of communication that work really well on the web? And that's one of them. And in addition to that, we need to remember that people are coming to us not directly, but are typically coming through social media. People are, they're reading at different times of the day. They don't have the customary, you wake up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, open the paper, sit there casually, and then go off to work. They're reading all the time. And there are certain times of the day where they're more likely to read. So you don't publish at night on a print schedule just when everybody's going to bed, because there aren't going to be very many people to read that story until the next morning. So you change your entire publishing schedule and things like that. So there are a lot of different things you can do, and you can use technology to put in front of people, if they're reading one story, if you have some sense of what they're interested in, and can be developed good technology tools, they will put in front of people a story that they might be inclined to click on next. And people aren't they don't expect to be searching for information these days. They expect the information to find them.
Marty, can you just give an example, actually, the BMW example, the food stamps? This was from your Post Everything.
Right. Well, look, a good headline helps a lot, but good stories. We started a portion of our website called Post Everything, which is commentary sort of in the moment. It's not an op-ed. It's not typically, the former Assistant Secretary of State or the chief scientist here or there. It's typically, in many instances, it can be an ordinary person talking about something that happened in their own lives. And we look for those, we search for those, we help people write them, and we edit them. And one of our most successful was from a woman who wrote a piece that we headlined, "What Happened When I Drove My Mercedes to Pick Up My Food Stamps." It may not surprise you that got a lot of attention. But it was a serious subject, and It was a woman who, she had a job. Her husband had a job. They just acquired a home, taken out a mortgage, a substantial mortgage, and she was giving birth to twins. She then lost her job. Her husband lost his job. They had a mortgage and they had twins, and she had virtually no savings. So she was in need of help. What's the story on the Mercedes? Well, this was a Mercedes that they had, and it was all paid off. Why would she trade in a Mercedes at that point and go borrow money, to buy a car? It doesn't make any sense just because it looked good. It looks good. So it was an interesting piece and very well done, and it attracted a lot of attention.
Amanda.
Hi, my name's Amanda. We're with CBC. I'm also Carleton alumni. I wanted to ask about the impact of the story that Spotlight did and how that could translate today with local audiences. So you have a newspaper that you do deliver to subscribers that they were reading on their doorstep every day, and it had an incredible impact, I imagine, at that time. What would be the challenge of that today when it's difficult to reach out to that local audience and have that same impact today with a big story like that?
Well, I guess I disagree with the premise that a story online can't have the same impact as one in print. I don't agree. In fact, one of the reasons why the church story had such a big impact is because it could be read around the world and was read around the world. And people could come together online in a way that they couldn't before. So it's something that if we had done that before and there was only print, only the people in Boston would have known about it pretty much. And the fact that it was online and people all over the world could compare notes, realize that this was happening in a lot of places, could organize themselves, made it especially powerful. And I think that that's true in communities and even within the confines of a city as well.
Hi, my name is Ashley Metzger. I'm a fourth-year journalism student at Carleton. My question is there an investigative story that you started that never actually saw the light of day, and why?
Sure, yes, absolutely, many. We had one during one of the presidential elections, and we were sure we had a story that was just going to blow up the entire election. Turned out we had to be incredibly secretive about it, so it took us a long time to really look into it, months and months, and we put a lot of resources into it. And then we discovered that it really wasn't true, and we dropped it, and that was it. So I can't tell you what that story was.
Go ahead.
I saw the Spotlight movie with a bunch of other journalism students. Sorry, I'm a fourth-year journalism student as well. And it was empowering, like Alan Thompson had said. So I think a lot of journalists, when watching that, had similar reactions. I'm wondering if you think that the movie in any way romanticized journalism or investigative journalism or those hardships, and whether that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, if that is true.
Sure. Well, I have a good friend of mine who's a journalist who said that I asked him whether his kids had seen the movie. They're college age or just out of college. And he said, no, and I don't want them to see the movie. And I said, well, why not? He said, I'm afraid they might want to become journalists. So as far as romanticizing investigations, I actually don't think it romanticizes investigations. I think it shows that it's really hard work, and I think that's one of the strengths of the movie. It's not like some source whispers in your ear or anything like that, and all of a sudden, it's just a leak or something like that. It's just a lot of hard work. You're sitting there going through documents. You're sitting there going through directories. It takes a long time. You have to go to people's homes, knock on their doors, intrude on their lives, and have them slam the doors in your face. That happens a lot. And you got to go to court. You got to you try to get, documents in court. They can be difficult to find. People may have put them under seal, or they kept them, let's say it's a government agency, they won't release it. You may have to file a FOIA in that instance. It's just really difficult work. And I think one of the things that, the critics have said in looking at the movie is that it accurately and authentically portrays what investigative reporting is all about. And I think that's true. I think that what people are enthralled by is the result, not how the work is done, but at the result itself. And I think people should be motivated by that. I hope they will be motivated by that. I do hope that this movie causes, owners, publishers, and editors to rededicate themselves to investigative reporting. I hope it causes the public to reflect on the need for investigative reporting and what it takes to do it right. And I hope it causes all of us to think about people who are at the margins of society, who've fallen to the margins or been pushed to the margins, and we'll listen to them because they have something important to say.
Marty, can I just ask you, actually, picking up from that, the journalists, the Spotlight journalists said that they think that, they kind of made a joke of it, but they think they were suffering from PTSD afterwards because they heard so many horrendous stories. I mean,
Right.
what responsibility did you feel for those journalists?
Well, I didn't know they were suffering from PTSD, so I just asked them to keep working. I only learned now, so I bear no responsibility for it. I would have gotten them treatment if I'd known. But I did, I didn't really have a sense of that, frankly, at the time. I mean, obviously, I knew it was difficult work and all of that. But, as editor of a paper that at one time had 500 journalists in its newsroom, doesn't have that now. There was a lot of stuff for me to do, and so, perhaps, incorrectly, I wasn't really paying attention to their mental health, and I probably should have, and perhaps evaluated them, not evaluated, but talked to them about it. There's a lot that I actually learned from this movie itself, the screenplay. I mean, no editor actually goes back and does. I didn't even know what their reaction was to me. I didn't know about the resistance to this story internally at all. And I mentioned that to Leo Schreiber when he came to my office to talk to me for a couple of hours, and he wondered how that was possible. And I said, well, first of all, I didn't have any sources in the newsroom because I was an outsider, and who was going to tell me? And nobody told me then, and nobody told me subsequently. And then when I saw it in the script, I asked about it, and they said, yeah, that's where they acknowledged that. So, so I learned, I learned from that, and and there are other things like comments like that. I didn't go back. No editor goes back and does like a forensic reconstruction of how the story came about. Like, okay, what did you think of me? What did you say to your sources? How did you feel when you said that? What did you say to each other? Things like that. You just don't do that. And at least I don't know any editors who do that. And you don't have time to do that, and you don't think about doing that, and you almost don't want to ask. Because you might find out stuff that you don't want to know.
So you learned a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name's Hugh Windsor. I've been around for a while.
So have I.
I'm interested in how you are going to apply your talents and investigative resources towards trying to pierce the fog, shall we say, around national security questions. What we've known is, thanks to Edward Snowden and others, that many of the senior people, both at Pentagon and in various other places, have lied to Congress, have misled Congress, etc. I mean, I'm acquainted with the parliamentary system, but if you're shown to have lied to Parliament, it's supposed to be the end of your careers, etc. And yet, many people seem to have gotten away in the national security world with lying to Congress. And what I'm wondering is, and thanks to Edward Snowden and others, we know that, are there more Edward Snowdens in the system? And are you trying to find them?
Well, first of all, I would just point out that the Post was one of two newspapers. Guardian was the other, that won the Pulitzer for public service for our work about the National Security Agency. And Snowden was a source for us. He provided us documents. We went through all of those we went through as many documents as we had, looking for every story that we felt was in the public interest, and we published those stories. So we disclosed a degree of surveillance by the American government that was unknown to the American public before, and for which there had been no public debate. And so I think what we tried to do there was to, ultimately, our view was that there should be a public debate about that, and that the kind of activities that the government was involved in should be disclosed. Obviously, you know, if there are other things in those documents or in other documents, we do publish those. We have I think, the best national security staff in the country. We have an entire staff dedicated to covering national security. And routinely, we're publishing things that we feel the American public should know. And if people are lying, we point that out. As to whether there are other Edward Snowdens out there, well, we will find out, right? So I think that at some point there will be somebody else. And probably, I don't know if there'll be somebody with quite the impact that he had. But a lot of government, what's happening now, at least in the United States, is that a lot of government officials are afraid to talk to the press at all, to even give an interview, for fear that if there is a leak investigation, that they will be an object of suspicion, that they will have to hire a lawyer, that it will come at great expense, their own personal expense. And so they feel the safest thing to do is not to even speak. Don't call me, call the public relations office. Don't ever call me again. We've seen government officials who've said, don't ever email me again. And they copy the public relations department, office on that. So we're finding a lot of concern, fear within the federal government about just even speaking to the press or even knowing anybody in the press or socializing with them. And that's a concern.
How do you get around that?
A lot of hard work, knocking on doors. We still, routinely, we publish stories that the government doesn't want us to publish. Fortunately, there are people in government who feel that they have an ethical obligation to tell us things, or at other times, frankly, they have an axe to grind of one sort or another, and they tell us for that reason. And we understand that we just recognize what the motivation is. So there will always be people, I think there will always be people who want to tell us something. Counting on it.
Hi, my name is Callum Smith. I'm a student of information technology here at Carleton. By all accounts, the information age has been huge in terms of the possibilities of journalism, but a newspaper as a business is fundamentally based on being the ones who have and are able to distribute information. And I'm just wondering where you see the role of journalism in a world where distributing and getting information is so profoundly and increasingly easy to do.
Well, getting information is easy to do. Gathering that information can be very difficult to do. So I think that, one of the consequences of, you just type in some terms into Google search and something pops up, has led people to believe that this information is somehow freely available. I think it was Bob Woodward or somebody mentioned that it wasn't Woodward himself, I don't think, somebody said at some class and asked how would the Watergate investigation be done today? And somebody said we would Google it, as if somehow magically all of the information would appear on a Google search. And people said, oh, no, they couldn't possibly say that. That was apocryphal. That story never happened. But it did actually happen. And I think people don't understand the kind of resources that are required to produce something. So, if we do an investigation and publish it within 15 minutes, if not less time, other people will aggregate that story, and they will take the essence of it, and they will have it on their own site as well. And then you, as an ordinary individual, will say, look, that information is everywhere. I mean, what's the big deal? But at the front end, somebody had to invest an incredible amount of time to gather that information. That is one of the fundamental business challenges for us today, is that we can spend a lot of money gathering information, but we don't reap the financial rewards of having gathered that information because it becomes so dispersed. How do we get around that? I think that's one of the challenges. That's one of the challenges that we face today. To be honest, we do it to other people too. So we do it to ourselves. We try to repackage information so that maybe something that's in the middle of the story might become more visible in another way, and that people can access our stories in different ways. But the problem that you present is a huge challenge for our industry today, no question about it.
Mr. Baron, thanks for coming up here. I know you escaped one massive storm in your current area of work to come up to experience the Ottawa Valley weather here. But on behalf of everybody, thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in Boston again.
My question is on the relationship between an editor and his or her publisher. I only saw the movie once, but I don't think it was an area that was really explored very much. And I'm just curious. There has to be a creative tension between an editor and a publisher on an ongoing basis. And if you could comment on what the nature of that would have been working in a print medium with Mr. Bradley in Boston and in your current situation at the Post. Are they essentially the same, or are they different? And what's it like?
Well, this is being recorded, right? Look, I mean, there is creative tension. There is tension sometimes. There are difficult decisions. The publisher is responsible for everything at the news organization, at the newspaper, our business prospects, as well as the journalism that we do. I've been fortunate that at all the news organizations I've worked at, I've had supportive publishers when we've dived into the most sensitive subjects. So our publisher in Boston was supportive of the Catholic Church investigation. The subsequent publishers I had there, and I had 2 additional ones in my 11 and a half years there, they were also supportive of all the investigative work we did, which also generated its own controversy and its own pressure. At the Washington Post, when we decided to publish the documents that Edward Snowden had passed on to us, it had the potential for very serious implications for the Post as an institution, as well as for us individually. So the laws, if you read them closely, can be quite intimidating about that. So, but they were supportive as well, and in all the previous jobs that I had. I don't know if that's the case at every publication. It might not be. It probably is not in every instance. But I've disagreed with publishers on many issues in the past, but ultimately we move beyond those disagreements and we work in the best interest of the institution. I would never work at a place where I didn't feel I could do my job properly as a journalist. It's not worth it to me.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Zach Bradley. I'm a journalism student here. In Canada, we've had some news organizations remove the comment function online. And I was wondering, with 76 million viewers per month, well, what are your personal opinions on online comments?
Well, mostly it's a sewer, but we still have comments, and we haven't removed them, and we haven't required people to, register through Facebook or something like that, which other people have. People feel that we're essentially non-democratic institutions, that the press is, and that we're inaccessible. They want to have their say. We want them to have their say, no matter, sometimes it's offensive. We have all sorts of filters. We have people who monitor the comments in some fashion or another. Some of it we outsource, some of it we do internally. We have report abuse functions, things like that. What we're trying to do on comments is more ambitious than just eliminating them. And that is, we are, with the grant from the Knight Foundation, which is the primary journalism foundation in the United States, we are working with the New York Times. We're working with Mozilla, which produces the Firefox browser, and we're working with others in the industry to improve the nature of comments, to try to elevate the comments that actually have something significant and important to say, and to actually facilitate a serious conversation on the part of people rather than just have a long list of comments, that sort of thing. So we're working with them on doing this, and we're hopeful that it'll produce a positive result, but we're not there yet.
Hi, I'm Randy Boswell. I teach journalism here at Carleton. I guess one of the great dilemmas facing a lot of news organizations right now is the advertising model for revenue versus the subscriber model for revenue. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about those twin revenue sources and the challenges that they present, and whether or not those different revenue streams require different kinds of journalism and journalists?
Sure. Well, our sense at the Post is that we're going to need both. We need a lot of traffic. We need the advertising that comes with large numbers of people looking at our site. We also need to expose large numbers of people to the Washington Post who have not read us before, and hope that they will be so enthralled with the work that we are doing, as they should be, that they will subscribe. And that will be a small percentage of the overall. We're not going to have 76 million subscribers, except in our dreams, but we will have a portion of those who will decide to subscribe because they want to be regular readers. So we have a paywall. It's 5 stories. And I mean, there are all sorts of ways to get around it, I guess, but it's basically 5 stories. And we would hope that some people eventually will become subscribers. And we experiment with different ways of getting people to do that. It's really important that also that we develop the subscription model. They're our most loyal readers. The money is important to us. It can be more money than we get through advertising in many instances. And loyal readers are especially valuable to advertisers too, so it's important to remember that. I think ultimately that's not going to be, I don't know where it's all going to end up, but I think ultimately it may not be all that different from the model that we have in newspapers. You know, subscribers never paid for the entire newspaper. They paid only a small portion of it, maybe 15%, maybe 20%. But the rest of it was paid for by advertising. So we've never had a business that was paid entirely, where the expenses were paid entirely by subscribers. So I think we'll probably end up with a model where a portion of our budget will be provided by advertisers and a portion will be provided by subscribers.
Hi, my name is Michael Geisterfer. When I was a young journalist, just starting out, the Washington Post was just doing the Watergate scandal, which sort of resonates with your own story at the Boston Globe. I want to know right now, there's another story unfolding in the States along the same theme of speaking truth to power. Some people have accused the mainstream press of ignoring Bernie Sanders and his campaign. And I'm just wondering from your perspective whether that is true, and what is your take on his critique of corporate America?
Oh, well, I'm not going to talk about the latter because that would get me into politics, and I'm not going to do that. So, but as for whether we ignored his campaign, I don't actually think we ignored his campaign. We provided plenty of coverage. He had huge crowds. We wrote about it a lot. You know, people will argue that every candidate who's down in the polls will argue that at one point will argue that they deserve more coverage. I think till the day that Bobby Jindal pulled out of the presidential race, governor of Louisiana, he was arguing that he deserved more press coverage, and that if he'd had more, he would have done better. And everybody says that. And I don't think that you can press coverage correlates necessarily with how people are performing in the presidential race. If that were the case, and if what Bernie Sanders said were true, then he wouldn't have done as well as he did. And you know, there was hardly any attention to Trump when he announced, because everybody thought it was a joke candidacy. I don't even think, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm not even sure that the New York Times put him on the front page when he announced that he was running for president. And Huffington Post announced that they were going to put him in the entertainment section of their site.
Where did you put him?
I think that was a gimmick, by the way, that they just said that, but because we noticed that their political correspondents were still covering him at the time, but they don't put him there anymore. So, nor should they have, because he was a candidate and he had supporters, whether you like it or not. And so there was very little attention paid to him, and then he said things that actually resonated with a substantial portion of the American public, like it or not. And so we gave him coverage as a result of that. And now, you know, I think Sanders, I mean, it was interesting, the Iowa, after the results in Iowa, I don't think there was a candidate who got up to give a speech who didn't say that, you know, this will show the media. So the media was against Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton says the media is against her because of all the critical stuff that's been written about the foundation, about the emails, about her, everything about her. The media supposedly was against Marco. He brought it up. The media is supposedly against Donald Trump. The media is against Ted Cruz. The media was against, you know, you name the candidate, they said the media was against them. So apparently we're against all of them. And that might be true, but no, but you know, everybody said that we were to blame for whatever was happening. You know, they have a responsibility to run their own campaigns, and obviously Bernie Sanders ran a very good campaign, and he knew that there are ways to garner support, and he did garner support, and maybe he didn't need the media to do that. But once he garnered the support, that was reflected, I think, in the media.
We have time for 2 more questions, but don't despair if we don't get to you, because there's a reception afterwards where we can have a glass of wine together, and you can tackle Marty there. So go ahead.
Hi, my name's Phoebe Berkeley, and I'm in first-year journalism here at Carleton. I was just wondering, for those starting out in journalism and are just getting an insight on the world of journalism, I was just wondering what inspired you to pursue the profession, and if you had any advice for those in early stages of journalism.
Right. Well, sometimes it's hard to reconstruct exactly what inspired you, but I think it was because I grew up in a family. My parents were from overseas. They'd immigrated to the United States. The year that I was born, in 1954, they came from Israel by way of Paris for 2 years. I don't know why they didn't stop, but it's like, stop already, you know, stay there. But they kept going, and they came to the United States afterwards, and they went first to, you had to go through New York then, and then they went to Florida. Also, again, it's like, stop. But I went to Florida in 1954, and they were interested in the world. They were interested in what was happening internationally. They were interested in what was happening in this country that they had immigrated to. They read the newspaper every morning. It was a ritual in our family. And then in the evening, they watched the local news, and then they watched the national news. I remember it very distinctly, the Huntley-Brinkley report. And that's what we watched. And that was our ritual. And I must have absorbed that. So that got me into the business, I guess. And from a very early age, junior high school, I was pretty sure I wanted to be a journalist. So, kind of weird. So, you know, as for advice, I think you need to learn. First of all, I would say that I don't think it's true that there are not good opportunities. I think there are an incredible number of opportunities that are opening up for journalists. I don't think you can look at your opportunities and say, well, it's at newspapers, or it's at a traditional television station, or it's at a traditional radio station. There are a lot of new sites that are opening up, doing a lot of interesting things. And some of them are reshaping what journalism is all about. Vice would be an example of that, which is very popular among young people, but it's a different approach to video. We can argue about, I guess we can argue about some of the things, the approach, but it's interesting. And there are other sites that are doing really interesting things. So, and I welcome them all. I mean, they're all extra competition for us, but the more the merrier. If they're doing responsible, honorable journalism, I'm in favor of it. So I think that for journalists, they need to learn the basics, be curious about the world, learn all the basic skills, be a good writer, be a good thinker, be a critical thinker, all of that, and learn all the new tools that are available, because we're going to use them, we're going to deploy them, and people will ask you to. And understand, then have some understanding of the business. I don't mean like the business isn't the profession, I mean the actual business with a dollar sign. Just have some appreciation for how this business works. For most of us in the business, we never, and be kind of entrepreneurial, either within an organization or entrepreneurial for your own company or whatever it might be, or a small company, because that's the way things are going. For most of my career, journalists who worked at newspapers, they didn't know anything about the business. They didn't want to know anything about the business, and they probably had a disdain for the business. Well, those days are over, and we have to sort of understand it. We don't do everything just because it promotes the business. As you know, we have our principles, and we should stick to them. But we shouldn't be ignorant of it either. So I think those are, that's some of the advice that I would give.
Okay, last question, Joanna.
And by the way, I would just say, and be an optimist, okay? Because be an optimist. I mean, somebody asked me, like, well, why would I be optimistic? And I said, well, there's no acceptable alternative. I mean, how do you go into work every day not thinking that you're going to do well, that we're going to solve our problems? I don't know how you can succeed. We have to succeed at what we do, and you can't succeed at work if you just go in every day and say, this isn't going to work. This thing's going to fail. This will never, you just can't be successful that way. And you don't want to be a workforce. You don't have a workforce like that. And so you have to be optimistic. Just because because it's difficult, incredibly difficult, does not mean that it's impossible. And I don't think it's impossible.
All right. My question is not so optimistic, but I'm hoping that your answer
We'll
will
fix
be...
you. We'll fix you here, right here
yeah. I'm Joanna Smith. I'm a journalist here in Ottawa. And I like what you were saying, that quote from the town hall with your owner about, you know, some value can't always be measured in metrics. But not every newspaper is fortunate enough to be owned by a billionaire who's really interested in journalism, right? And some newspapers are owned by hedge funds. And it's been a really dark month in Canadian journalism. A hedge fund essentially made the decision to merge 8 papers in 4 major cities and lay off 90 journalists roughly, which economies of scale would be like 900 journalists in the US and 80 papers merging into 40, right? So what would be your elevator pitch on investigative journalism for a newspaper owned by a hedge fund?
Take that. That's when you pull out your resting bitch face.
Boy. Gee, well, okay, I got to hold on to my optimism here. Hold on, my dear life here. Look, I'm concerned about the same sorts of things. I'm concerned about, there was a prospect that a private equity firm was going to buy the Boston Globe when I was there. I was not in favor of that. I was very concerned about what the implications of that would be. I also think that, well, if I were speaking to them, whether they listen to me or not, I would say that if they abandon investigative journalism, if they abandon the core purpose of our profession, their readers are going to leave them. Now, their interest may be only to suck out as much cash as they possibly can in an industry that they view as fading away. But if they expect to have a business over the long term, I think they need to establish a strong bond with their readers and feel that they're working in their readers' interest, not just in their own personal interest. And I think every news organization needs to persuade the public that it's working in their interest and not in their own personal interest. And so that's the advice that I would give them. Whether they would take that advice or not, I don't know. But to the extent to which they abandon that mission, there will be other people who will crop up with other sites and what have you, who will try to deliver on that promise. And I would predict that over the long run, that they would be the ones that are successful.
Great questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.